This is a Code Ninja security advisory. I'm issuing an urgent, high-adrenaline cyber intelligence briefing on an actively exploited threat that is, in all likelihood, sitting inside your perimeter right now. We're executing a coordinated vulnerability disclosure explainer today because you absolutely need to know exactly what is happening with CVE 2026-45659. This is a critical remote code execution flaw in on-premises Microsoft SharePoint servers. Defenders, listen to me very closely on this one. A patch was issued silently. The vendor initially labeled exploitation as less likely, and now, well, threat actors are actively weaponizing this in the wild to compromise networks. If you're out there relying on a closed IT ticket to tell you your SharePoint farm is safe, you are operating under a fatal oversight. Okay, let's dive into this. The vulnerability carries a CVSS base score of 8.8 out of 10. Now, I need you to snap to attention here, because that number, it really only tells half the story. This is a network-based attack. It has low attack complexity, and most critically, it requires zero user interaction. None. An attacker doesn't need to trick one of your administrators into clicking a phishing link. They simply need a network path to your SharePoint server and a basic, low-level authenticated account. Once they have that, they can execute arbitrary code on your underlying server, completely compromising the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your hosted content. The operational timeline reveals a massive breakdown in threat prioritization. Let's trace this back. In May 2026, Microsoft shipped fixes for this flaw in their monthly security updates, but the CVE was inadvertently omitted from the initial advisory. It was essentially a silent patch. Around May 21st to 22nd, public disclosure finally occurred, but exploitation was still labeled as less likely. Then, reality hit. Hard. On July 1st, 2026, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, slammed this right into their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. They established a strict emergency remediation deadline of July 4th for federal agencies. So the operational meaning of this vulnerability instantly changed from, hey, patch this soon, to treat this as a confirmed, active real-world threat.
Before we move into Phase 2 and really tear apart the technical mechanics of this exploit, we're going to do a mandatory comms check. If you are managing enterprise infrastructure, you simply cannot afford to miss real-time intelligence. I need you to subscribe to @CyberTech7 right now and enable all notifications. Treat this as an absolute security necessity for your perimeter defense. Furthermore, hit the like button on this advisory. I am treating that as your formal acknowledgement of receipt for this tactical briefing. Do it now. Acknowledgement received. Moving into Section 1, Threat Anatomy and the Attack Surface.
So what's actually under the hood here? The core weakness is mapped as CVE-502, deserialization of untrusted data. Now, serialization is normally just how an application packages objects for storage or network transit. Deserialization is putting them back together. The danger pops up when an application accepts this serialized data across a trust boundary and rebuilds it with way too much authority. In CVE 2026-45659, an attacker basically coerces your SharePoint server into processing a crafted malicious serialized payload. Because SharePoint doesn't strictly validate the resulting data before object creation, that payload reconstructs into what we call a gadget chain. This chain abuses existing application logic to trigger arbitrary remote code execution. You aren't just giving them data, you are literally handing them the keys to execute server-side commands right in the context of the SharePoint application. And this brilliantly illustrates a massive misconception in the security community regarding this specific flaw. You see, the vulnerability requires low privileges, specifically site member access. A lot of defenders see requires authentication, and they immediately deprioritize the ticket. But let's compare the reality of a default enterprise environment to a hardened architecture. SharePoint is built for collaboration, right? Site member permissions are ubiquitous. They're handed out like candy to employees, vendors, contractors, and all those forgotten service accounts. An attacker doesn't need to be a domain admin to launch this RCE. They just need one phished employee password or one stale external partner account that still has site member access. In a standard enterprise, let me be clear, low privilege does not mean low risk. Which brings us to Section 2, Vulnerable Builds and Threat Hunting. Now that we understand the blast radius, we need to identify exposed perimeter assets. The crucial point here is knowing exactly which builds are vulnerable. Keep in mind, this vulnerability impacts on-premises SharePoint Server, not SharePoint Online. Grab a screenshot of these exact fixed build numbers right now. For Subscription Edition, you need to be at or above build 16.0.19725.2880. For Server 2019, it's build 16.0.1417.2128. And for Enterprise Server 2016, build 16.0.5552.1002. Listen to me very carefully on this next part. If you run a multi-server farm, you must validate these build numbers across every single node. Web front ends, application servers, standby nodes, all of them. The most fatal mistake an administrator can make right now is the half-patched farm, where one legacy node is left exposed, granting the attacker a direct vector right past your updated servers. All right, SOC analysts, this one is for you. We are moving into rapid-fire threat hunting protocols. Public exploit chains aren't fully detailed yet, so we have to rely heavily on behavior-based signals. First, look for anomalous child processes, like cmd.exe, PowerShell.exe, or csc.exe, spawning directly from the IIS worker process w3wp.exe. That is a massive red flag for server-side execution. Second, scan for unauthorized web shell writes, specifically unexpected.aspx files dropping into your SharePoint layouts directories. Third, monitor your IIS logs for abnormally large, authenticated post requests targeting SharePoint endpoints. And finally, inspect your network traffic for base64 encoded binary formatter or loss formatter payload markers. If you see any of these, you are actively under fire.
Let's talk about emergency patching and remediation. Because identifying the threat isn't enough, we need to lock down the network.
Here is your sequential emergency remediation protocol. Step 1. Identify every single farm asset and its internet exposure. Do not forget those old disaster recovery nodes. Step 2. Deploy the Microsoft security updates to reach the fixed build numbers we just discussed. Step 3, and this is where people fail, validate the patch by running the SharePoint Products Configuration Wizard. If you don't run the configuration steps, the patch is completely incomplete. Step 4. Rotate your ASP.NET machine keys and restart IIS. Merely installing a binary update is entirely insufficient if an attacker has already staged a payload or compromised your keys pre-patch.
Now, if you're wondering why I'm demanding key rotation and deep forensic hunting, it is because of historical precedent. Let's look back at the 2025 tool shell incidents. In those attacks, threat actors like Storm 2603 leveraged on-premises SharePoint vulnerabilities as a gateway for lateral movement, which ultimately resulted in chained ransomware deployments across the enterprise. Think about it. SharePoint holds your business context, your documents, and your integrated Active Directory credentials. A server-side RCE here is a direct path to total domain compromise. So if your vulnerable server was exposed prior to patching, you must operate under an assume breach mentality.
We're slowing the pace down for our final topic today, disclosure ethics and sign-off. The core ethical mandate of the white hat security researcher is to force vendor accountability and arm defenders with the truth. Users need to know to protect their systems. When a vulnerability hits the CISA KEV list, the operational reality changes entirely. A simple, closed IT patch ticket without hard version evidence, without deep log reviews, and without an audit of over-permissioned accounts is absolutely not enough for a KEV-listed remote code execution flaw. We disclose these mechanics so you rely on verified forensic evidence, not just assumptions. So, I'll leave you with a final provocative challenge for your operational readiness today. Look at your own environment. Is your perimeter truly secured against CVE-2026-45659, or are you just blindly trusting a green checkmark on a patch ticket? Go verify your builds, hunt for those child processes, rotate those keys. Do the hard work to ensure your network is actually safe. Thank you for acknowledging this Code Ninja Security Advisory. Stay secure.